It is very humbling to follow words of such eloquence and passion, but I'll do my best in a few minutes. The old book says, if you owe debts, pay debts. If honor, then honor. If respect, then respect. And when I heard that the gentleman from Arizona had organized a modest tribute to the 43rd President of the United States today on the House floor, I felt this was such a moment to pay a debt of honor and gratitude to a man with whom I did not always agree. And as I sometimes would joke at home, he almost always noticed. The time that as a freshman I opposed the President's signature legislation, No Child Left Behind, the time that I and other Republicans opposed other signature bills like the Medicare prescription drug entitlement, this was a president who would let you know when he had a difference of opinion. But always respectfully and never spitefully. So I stand here today not as a vacuous apologist for President George W. Bush. I've occasionally been referred to as a thorn in the flesh to the Bush administration, being a cheerful conservative on Capitol Hill, was fighting against big government spending during the Bush years. But I come here today, among other cherished colleagues, like the gentleman from Iowa, simply to say that I truly believe that this nation owes a debt of gratitude to George W. Bush. I am struck, and I expect I will quote with attribution the gentleman from Arizona's missive about popularity being the pocket change of history. It is a wonderful line, because it is my judgment, as Mr. Franks just suggested, that when the fullness of time arrives and the American people are able to see the contribution of this good and decent man in the context of history, they will know that George W. Bush served this nation with integrity and with courage and was, in effect, the kind of president that America needed during such a time as this. And I say that and I told the President not long ago that it was one of the greatest privileges of my life that the first 8 years of my career in public service would coincide with his 8 years in the White House. I sensed a little emotion in his eyes when I said that, and the bear hug that followed gave evidence of it. But again, it wasn't because I always agreed with this president. It was because I saw that when it mattered most, George W. Bush did what he thought was right, regardless of what the polls said, regardless of what may have been in his personal interest. And I want to cite two specific examples and then close with a word about the fundamental character of the presidency and what character means to the office. The two occasions that will always be burned into my mind because I lived them, I was here that day and in those days, were in effect a day in September in 2001 and another day in the latter days of 2006 and early 2007. In September 2001, I scarcely need to say to you, Mr. Speaker, or anyone looking in, about the service this president rendered to America. In what at least matched her darkest hour, as the buildings fell, as the smoke was still rising from the Pentagon, as I had made my way home to hug my small children at our residence in Arlington, Virginia, and had worked my way back into this closed city for official meetings, as I crossed that 14th Street Bridge, the two Marine One helicopters blew past me, maybe 50 feet off the deck, and our president went back to the White House that day. shoulders back, he stood tall. A few days later, he would literally stand amidst the rubble of September 11th and Ground Zero and drape his arm over a firefighter and speak into a bullhorn words that would echo American resilience around the world, and the nation was no longer afraid. I won't add any more to that, because it seems to me in that moment when my great-grandchildren look back at these times, more than any other aspect of George W. Bush's career, he will be judged in that moment, and he will not be found wanting. You talk about approval ratings. I think that it was following that moment that a man who left office as one of the least popular presidents in our history was for a time the most popular president in American history. But I can assure you, having spoken to him about it privately, none of that mattered to him. Didn't matter that he was popular. Didn't matter that he was unpopular. He did what he thought was right for the American people, and he did it with courage. Second instance, and then I'll close. I was called over to the White House. I believe it was in early 2007. His party had just experienced devastating losses in the midterm elections. And a few of us that had survived were invited over to the White House for a meeting with the president. Everyone who was anyone in the punditocracy of this town thought that the president would announce a retreat from Iraq. The president called myself and about 15 other members into the cabinet room, members of foreign affairs committees and armed services. And he looked at us across the table and said, "I've counseled with this general I'm going to put in charge. His name is Petraeus. He says he's got a new idea about how we can put things back together in Iraq. And he said, I'm going to give him what he's asking for, and I'm going to put him in charge because," and he said words I'll never forget, "I've decided not to lose." As I told the president personally a year later, I believe in the fullness of time, when the history of this time is written, that will go down as one of the most courageous decisions by an American president in a time of war. All public opinion suggested, all the polling rather that was out suggested, a majority of Americans were ready to get out, regardless of the cost. Let it go to seed. Forget about the sacrifices that have been made. But this president decided not to lose. And he looked for a way to make it work. And he went to the American people. And as is undeniable today, the surge worked. I believe the gentleman from Iowa recently mentioned that more people have died in accidents in Iraq since last summer than have died in combat-related violence. Is it still a dangerous place? Certainly. Are there challenging days ahead? Of course. Is there a lethal enemy there and in the region? Yes, but it's not what it was in 2006. And that's because of the character and the resilience of this man. So on those two occasions, we saw character. And I believe that even though I disagreed with the president on the bailout last fall and again today on the floor, I disagreed with his spending record. In those moments, the character that shone through was a service to the nation. And my family was safer as a result. Last thought. It's been a long time since the 1990s. And people forget how embarrassed the American people were by what happened in the Oval Office, by the predecessor of this president. And I have no desire to revisit the sordid and lurid tales that were displayed before our children during the last administration. But to me, the essence of the presidency is character. And George W. Bush showed the courage of his convictions in defending this country, and he also showed through his fealty to his wife, through his integrity in office, the administration of what it is to provide good and decent government and to be an example to the American people and to our families and our children. For that, we owe him a debt, and I'm pleased to rise today to pay some small amount toward that. And I yield back to the gentleman from Arizona.